you see these never Trumpers, and boy, that's a subject. But it seems like so many neocons have morphed into never Trumpers. And I think it's partly because they didn't embrace the conservative ideology in full in the other years, in the previous years. And now they see no reason to grudgingly adopt those or continue in those positions.
Hello, Culminators. Thank you once again for joining us. I want to introduce you to someone that you may very well know already. In fact, David Limbaugh is a fairly well-known guy. If I didn't know that he were, I would know it because he's got almost 500,000 followers on X. He is the brother of the late Rush Limbaugh. I won't pretend that he's not. He's very proud of it, as you can see from his profile. David is a lawyer. So hopefully we can have a comprehensible, coherent conversation that the non-lawyers can understand. And he's coming to us from his home in Missouri. How are you, David?
Great, Ron. Thanks for having me on. How are you?
I am very happy to have this conversation and just get to know you a little bit better. And, you know, if we're going to do that, then why don't we just invite the rest of the country in as well? All the massive fruited plain people who watch my program whenever it goes up. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? I know you're a lawyer. You do a little bit of entertainment law. You seem to have gone to college and law school, like most lawyers. Just give us the elevator pitch. You're trying to get a job as an associate.
Boy, if I'm trying to be an associate at age 72, that's pretty sad. So I went to University of Missouri undergraduate and law school. After my sophomore year, I got drafted, so I went in the National Guard for 6 months, and then did the weekend meetings for 5.5 years after that, and then started practicing with a family firm. My grandfather practiced till he was 103. My uncle was a federal judge. Cousin's a federal judge still, and pretty much everybody in our family, except Rush, the most successful, were lawyers. My dad was a lawyer, so I always wanted to be a lawyer. Who knows why? But I did from the time I was in second grade, and so I've always had a love for the law, and I've practiced for, I guess, I got out at 78, so that's probably 46, 47 years, and when you live in a small town, you pretty much do general practice and try to be a jack of all trades. And I always wanted to be a Renaissance lawyer. I wanted to do everything till I realized that even when, you and we're close to the same age, I think, or maybe you're young. I don't know, but
I'm a couple years younger. But we have more in common generationally than most of the people we interact with.
Yeah, and back during that day, there wasn't as much specialization, but boy, not long after I started practicing, specialization was a thing. And I realized that this idealistic attitude I had about being all things to all people was not going to work. And I wished I could have specialized earlier. You make more money, you're less stress, everything's better. But I didn't realize that until later. And then I kind of lucked into practicing entertainment law. It was always transactional. We all do litigation. We start out. And I liked it, but there just wasn't enough. And so Rush asked me to represent him when he was in Sacramento, his radio contract out there, and then also when he was syndicated. And from that point, I represent other radio and TV hosts, and also I'm also an author myself. I've written 11 books, 5 Christian books and 6 political books, which gives me I think a good perspective to represent people in this field, because I approach it from both sides, as the talent and as the lawyer / agent. So I was so blessed in a million ways having Rush as my brother, but especially in terms of professionally getting my foot in the door. And so now I represent a lot of people at Fox, Newsmax, Daily Wire, the Blaze, various different people. And I won't mention any of them, of course. But so I feel totally blessed. And, I'm not as busy as I was when I was younger because I have fewer clients, but more intense clients, but it doesn't take as much time. So it's kind of cool. I'm not ever going to retire if I can help it, but I don't have to work grueling like 60 hours a week with highly stressful, low paid general lawyer practitioner stuff. You know what I mean? And
I do. And it was worth it setting this up just to hear about the evolution of your practice and your attitude towards practicing as a senior citizen, as a seasoned citizen, as Rutgers.
yes, yeah.
Because my wife is always asking me, "How are we going to retire? You haven't saved any money," because Jewish life is extremely expensive, and you also know having a lot of kids can be a big budget item too. And I said, Jane, they're gonna find me in my office. Okay, this is what I do. This is who I am, and most of the lawyers that I know who love the law. And they're not, I hate to think that there are people who are in their 60s and 70s who are still practicing law but don't love it.
Yeah.
Uh, have no interest in stopping what they do, even if they slow down a little bit.
I will say, I will say this, that I think I love the law itself more than I love the practice of law. I
Oh,
love
of course.
studying
First of all, the
law.
practice of law includes clients.
Oh my God. In fact, well, I'm not even going to say that because I'll get myself in trouble. But
Well, we share some of the same clients, it seems, broadly speaking, without naming anyone in particular. So we know what we're talking about. Our clients are great, but there are clients who would not have been on the list that you just mentioned who make life a little bit less enjoyable.
well, I would actually say before my current specialization in entertainment law, I will say in the general practice, divorces, domestic, criminal, you do it all when you're, and what I'm going to say is you have a lot more, or I did, a lot more difficulty having conflict with my own clients than I did with the other side because people can be so unreasonable and you just want to pull your hair out if you still have some. And but could have been my attitude, whatever, who knows? But it's an interesting thing in the law practice because I could have my theories of why lawyers are unpopular and it's unfair, and I could go into it because I love the law. And by the way, I don't know what kind of audience you have out here, but I'll just say this controversial comment. I think lawyers, by and large, are more ethical than even the lay public. 90% of the lawyers I've dealt with all my life are very respectable people. Now, there are some shysters, and they're the worst of the worst. But mostly, we hold ourselves up to ethical standards, which a lot of professions don't. So I'm saying that only kind of to be controversial.
You're saying it to the right guy. I've said it a million times online. People, look, one bad experience will stay with you your whole life, but we're among the very few people who can lose our ability to make a living in a million ways. I remember I worked for a guy who was a much older lawyer than I was, and who was a big, strapping former football player out of Dartmouth. And he was at a football game as an alumnus, and some guy was, probably trashed behind him. And my guy wanted to turn around and slug him. He said, I can't do that. I'm a lawyer. I simply can't. I can't clock someone, and that goes. And I was just thinking about some trust checks that I have to draw this morning. Think of the responsibility that you and I have that people just take for granted. That with no one really watching us, I mean, the occasional bar audit notwithstanding, all this money belonging to other people, and we are trusted with watching it, making sure it's never commingled with the wrong money. It's really, and people just don't appreciate it. It's interesting that you come from a family of lawyers, whereas I was the first one in my family to even go to college.
Wow.
Because I come from basically an immigrant family.
Yeah.
And and yet you had you talk about specialization. Early on in my career, so my father had a cousin who was a lawyer. He was like the lawyer that I knew, cousin
Yeah.
Hal.
Yeah.
And I asked, I was already a litigator, but I had a special interest in intellectual property.
Yeah.
And I was in a general practice litigation firm doing what I thought I should be. But I had always been interested in trademarks. And then I got a call to come in on for an interview with one of the IP boutiques, which existed still in the 80s. And I called up Hal and I said, "What do you think? I'm early in my career. Should I do this? It's something I know that I really want to go into," which I did end up doing in a
Yeah.
big way. And he said the same thing a lawyer of that vintage would say, which is no, you don't want to specialize too early in your career.
Which I always said that, but I don't believe it anymore.
Yeah, I think by the 80s that had changed. I think that it was bad. It was not the right advice, although I don't regret any adventures I
No.
had in my career. But and in fact, the firm, I think it was Cowan and I think it was one of those IP shops in New York that doesn't exist anymore, meaning that the lawyers are just somewhere else. But I do think that being, I unlike you, I started out in big firms.
Yeah.
So I had this sort of assembly line experience, the kind of thing that nearly very early on drove me out of the profession. If I thought I could have found another way to make a living, because you know me from online, I'm idiosyncratic and iconoclastic, and that's
Yeah.
not the kind of personality you want to bring into Park Avenue.
You're an indentured servant at those places. I mean, I know too many people. They make them billable hours, whatever it is a week, and you have to bill whether you're productive or not. In my opinion, I've never worked.
Absolutely, no, you're 100% right.
And it's the wrong kind of pressure to have. And you don't have any autonomy to cut a bill if you want to cut a bill.
But David, so many people think of all the lurkers. The world is full of lurkers and non-participating characters, non-playing characters, and a lot of them do what they need to do and they do it well. And as a lawyer, how much even at your level of seniority and doing stuff mostly for yourself, there's a lot of bricklaying that has to be done.
Yep.
That isn't immediately satisfactory, but it's part of the process. And one of the good things about being experienced, it's funny, this morning on the way in, I was listening to one of my streamer friends mention in passing, well, now I've been practicing law for 10 years. Boy, how time flies. I think 10 years.
Yeah.
10 years in, I still had no idea what I was doing.
I know. Yeah, the more you learn, the more aware you are of your own limitations and ignorance.
You mentioned your experience as a writer. Am I correct that this is your most recent book, Jesus on Trial?
No, that was the first Christian book.
That was the first Christian book. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so what should I be looking for?
The Resurrected Jesus, which I wrote with my daughter Kristen a few years ago. And by the way, before we get into the Jewish Christian thing, let me just brag about something. My city, Cape Girardeau, 35,000. Rush and I grew up here. Whole family grew up here, and we had a Jewish community. That I'm proud of this. We even had a synagogue. Can you believe that in this small a town? And a lot of prominent people. I'll name drop one. They're the Hecks. Alan Hecht, who is a radiologist and is trained as a rabbi in Chicago. Brilliant guy.
I know the Hechts of Chicago.
You did? So Marty Hecht was his dad and had a clothing store. And his brother, Marty's brother, was Chick Hecht, who was a senator from Nevada.
Yeah, sure.
How cool is that? And so, and then we had my neighbor, David Pollock. So we grew up with you. But I became even more pro-Jewish and pro-Israel as the stronger a Christian I became. And I know you can relate to that. Some people don't understand that. And that's when I see these Christians out there who are anti-Semitic, and we're seeing that strain going around. It is so disconcerting, and it's embarrassing to those of us who are pro-Israel and pro-Jewish. I just don't understand it.
It is really something to see, David, because what has happened is there's Whether it's real or astroturfed or an op, I don't know, but there's definitely a category of people who have decided that being pro-Israel is neocon, is a
Oh,
neoconservative thing, and that there's and also the evangelicals are are not being right, as you pointed. Evangelicals are not really being good Christians because good Christians should be anti-Israel. They might say anti-Jewish, they might just say the anti-Israel, which is just usually code words for the same thing.
I, Zionist. I think it is. I just saw that on Twitter. Somebody put, may even have been you. I think there's some truth to that. That it's code. As is Christ is King. If it's used in a provocative, hostile way, it's not otherwise. But now I won't say it because it's deliberately provocative. And Jesus is Lord, whatever. But there's a connection here. I don't know. We're probably boring your audience to tears.
Oh no, I think people actually remember. I only have 7 people who watched, so I know pretty much what they like.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I'm
you mentioned the neocon thing. It's interesting to me because I didn't know that neocon was pejorative, but that's also an anti. For some, it's an anti-Semitic.
Yeah, it's a signal.
But if I would use it, like to describe Bush and those guys, I've moved away. I've moved away on a few issues. I'm a doctrinaire, ideological conservative, but I've changed it a little bit over the years on free trade. I'm a Milton Friedman free trader, but I'm not as much anymore because we're at China's mercy and all that, and I don't feel as nervous about tariffs. I'm a little nervous economically what's going to happen, but I'm not the free trader I used to be because we've got to build stuff here. We've got people, everybody in the world wants to kill us and take us out. We learned during COVID in the supply chain, we've got to be self-sufficient, and I feel good about that. But
also, David, as a lawyer,
yeah,
and especially as a transactional lawyer,
yeah,
you don't take anything off the table when you're negotiating.
There you go.
And the free trade idol worshippers. Okay, I mean, we all took economics in college.
So
we get it.
I minored in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I majored in it.
Yeah.
And we understand the theory.
Totally.
Even if there's a tariff on the other side, on the curves, I can show you that it's more efficient and more wealth building for me to be to not have tariffs. Having said that, it's a false dichotomy. What if I can, instead of being victimized by tariffs and just saying, well, the utility is higher, what if we say, let's both not have tariffs and I'll have even more wealth? So
and it used to be that in the theory that it redounds to the detriment of the consumer, whether there's the trade deficit is irrelevant according to the purists, but that they look at it sterilely from totally an economic benefit standpoint, and
right.
That's not the whole game. National security is a big deal, and Milton Friedman, I don't know, he's so brilliant. He could probably shoot me down in 5 seconds, but apart from him,
yeah, he was a brilliant man. And and guys like him always had answers for this kind of stuff. But there's national security, and there are other political factors in the category of, how do I call it, diplomacy?
Yes.
And also domestically. And as you were saying, people want to know that their politicians are not selling them out.
Right.
And it isn't, look, based on, again, what we learned from economics about comparative value.
Yeah.
It's never going to be economical for us to build trinkets, to manufacture trinkets, or to build, there's stuff. They're going to make iPhones cheaper in China no matter what we do. And most people want a cheaper iPhone. Let's not kid ourselves. Having said that, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There are definitely areas, there are industries that one of the reasons that Taiwan is so important, as you know, is because they make all the chips.
Yep.
And that's a national security issue.
Yes, it is.
Make any of our own chips, which is something that is, I think even the Biden administration realized had to change. these are, these are all right. So but we have diverged. You were talking about how you've grown. None of us is the conservative we were 20, 30 years ago. It's a different world. It's definitely a different world. We've learned a lot.
But it's not because we worship Trump. This is where the never Trumpers are so. It's nothing to do with that. And I think Trump has evolved on issues. I think we have, but
Oh, yes.
I think circumstances have. I don't think I'm betraying my conservative roots by changing on a few issues. You talk about tariffs. 25%. All the countries screw us. Why shouldn't we try to get that more equitable? The only thing that bothers me about Trump a little on tariffs is he is forecast too much that he's a negotiator. So it's like, I'm doing this to negotiate. The best negotiation is kind of silent, but it's understandable because he had to sell that to be more electable. And so anyway, but that's interesting. But neocons, here's the thing though. I want to throw something out provocative, if I may. Is that okay? No,
Are you kidding?
Well, not toward you, but
we're generating these are the clips, man. This is what.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. While I rejected the idea that there's any connection between neocon and Jewish, there is some historical, actual connection. The Norman Podhoretz, not John. That's another issue. Well, John too, and Bill Kristol's dad. All these guys, they used to be Democrats, social justice people, and because of the threat of communism and whatever, they became Republicans. Mona Charen, and now that they think that Trump, this is just my bootstrap analysis. Now that they think that Trump is not as much of a foreign policy hawk, then these other reasons to be a Republican go away, and Mona. I love Mona for years. And now she's a full-fledged Democrat. She even said something negative about me in a column. She came to my first book signing. And when we were friends, anyway, I watched her on the McLaughlin group. And I won't say anything bad about her. I still love Mona. I just wish she were still a Republican. But, and you see all these neocons. You see these never Trumpers. And boy, that's a subject. But it seems like so many neocons have morphed into never Trumpers. And I think it's partly because they didn't embrace the conservative ideology in full in the other years and in the previous years. And now they see no reason to grudgingly adopt those or continue in those positions. I could be wrong, but that's kind of my view of it.
Well, I mean, that is a common analysis. A lot of people think that. I mean, here's something I think that would jibe with that, which is at the end of the day, their primary objection to Donald Trump is not based on policy.
That's it.
It can't be, because he's the most conservative president we've seen, at least since Reagan.
Yeah.
And in many ways more so. Not because he's an ideological conservative, but because he's a common sense American, a regular guy.
That's it.
But their objection to Trump is aesthetic.
Yeah.
He turns them off. He is embarrassing. He's the anti-Obama.
Yes.
You can't take him anywhere.
But there's
that
something
is a
else.
very elitist.
It is. It's a snobbish, but there's another thing too, I think. And I defer to you on these issues on what Jewish people think.
No need to defer.
Well, I think because I've talked to a lot of Jewish friends. Why are you guys so liberal? And I know Podhoretz's dad, Norman, wrote a book about it and all that. And there's something about the oppression of Jews historically that makes them identify with the downtrodden. And they think they bought in this idea that Republicans aren't compassionate, which is so outrageously wrong. So there's an element of racism, and they've slandered Trump as a racist, and he's clearly not a racist. So they think that, and I think so many Jewish people think that the Jewish liberals think that we conservatives don't care about people, don't have compassion. They're so wrong, but you can't. I don't know.
David, it is a religious objection, but not from the religion of Judaism.
No,
they have replaced Judaism with democratism.
So true.
The number of observant Jews who are bona fide Democrats as opposed to tactical Democrats, like in the one-party states in New York and increasingly in New Jersey, I think there's a strategic problem with doing it that way, because you end up reinforcing the one-party system, but I get
Yeah.
why they do it. By and large, as you know, Orthodox Jews are conservative, very conservative.
Very concerned.
We're the real traditionalists who are
I
living
know.
it. But the assimilated Jews, I've frankly, amateur psychology, they have somehow bought this gospel. Finally found a gospel they could buy. But the gospel that they bought is, yes, the Democratic Party is the party of compassion. Don't confuse me with the facts. Um, it is, and this is even with the Democrats embracing Islamism and
Unbelievable.
Hamas. They simply, well, you simply can't have the conversation. And you mentioned Rush. Russia was always saying how he's really just trying to talk about facts. I mean, it's amazing for all the people who had bad things to say about Rush. So how few people listen to them. Well, guess what? Liberals don't listen to anything we have to say.
No.
Absolutely not. It is impossible for me to get anyone who is known as a liberal to talk to me on my little show.
Right.
Even little Ron Coleman is poisoned. And of course, I'm not asked to go on any liberal shows. I get that.
But they think there's a distinction here. They think we are evil to the core. We think what they believe is often evil, but not that they are evil. And I think that's a significant difference. And we'd like to persuade them and move them from their irrational worldview, their emotional worldview. I'm not talking about Jews, by the way. I'm talking about liberals.
Yeah.
But there's an interesting thing. One of my Jewish friends who has told me the same thing, that Orthodox Jews, observant Jews, are by and large, no, not by and large, overwhelmingly political conservatives, and it's observably true. But he said the others, to the contrary, are secular Jews, and their religion, this is in rough terms, becomes political or ideological. Because secular, that's their religion. Well, but I don't think that's quite that simple, because I've watched some secular liberal Jews who do have an affinity for cultural Judaism. And because my friend David Pollock, he said, no, they won't have anything to do with Jew. I said, David, I know some. I looked at Facebook of one of my old friends that was Jewish. She's a liberal. She's attached to all of these Jewish organizations. So they still identify as Jewish. Now tell me if I'm wrong about that. And tell me why I'm not boring.
Oh, you're 100% right. So here's the thing, David. It is immensely easier to write checks, especially for people who have money, right? To write checks and join organizations and sign petitions than to not drive your car on the Sabbath and to not be able to eat in the same restaurant as your friends eat it. And we're not talking about a generation of people who grew up observant and gave it up. That's a conversation we could have had 20 years ago.
Right.
But the people, even in their 50s and 60s, and much less anyone younger, they grew up secular. They grew up as identifying Jews, and what we see is that they're majority intermarried. And here's the thing: if you are not observant, there is no ethical argument against intermarriage, because then all you're arguing for is some sort of ethno superiority or racism or prejudice or bigotry. So you meet the nicest girl you ever met in college. All these Jewish guys marry these Asian women who just so happen to be exactly the opposite of what their mothers are like in every conceivable way. Just saying.
Yeah.
So when my parents were growing up, and in a time when Jews were 90% Democrats, it was scandalous for Jews to marry out. Now, it was also scandalous for white people to marry black people.
Yeah.
But the fact that something was scandalous, it doesn't really inform us. It just tells us about a community mores. But the thing about being Jewish as opposed to many other religions is you will not continue, your family won't be Jewish. If it matters to you, your family won't be Jewish if you don't marry a Jew. So there are all these boxes you can check. You can put an Israeli flag in your profile on X, and you're proud. I'm proud to be Jewish. But if it doesn't, the thing about Judaism, and it's also true of Christianity, and non-observant, non-religious people don't get this. It must inform your everyday life. It's not merely something, what color is your hair? What's your favorite team? It must inform your everyday life. And I'll never forget when they were, the audacity that some of these Congress people have to ask Catholic politicians or prospective judges questions about whether their faith is going to affect the way they rule. The person who is sitting there is made up of the things that he is, including his faith. What an offensive question. Does your faith in Marxism make you ask that stupid question?
It's not offensive as much as it is outrageously stupid and narrow-minded. And I've written about this too. The Establishment Clause does not prevent me from allowing my worldview to inform my political views. It's absurd. That's not a establishment of religion in a representative democracy for people that get elected democratically to go push for their own worldviews, whatever they are. I have a right to say my Christianity teaches me this and that, and I want to lobby for it. I got to convince a majority of people. That's not an establishment of a state religion.
And I'll tell you something else about the Jews, which is the Jews who are not secure in their own faith because it isn't a part of their daily lives. They're the ones who are the most intimidated and threatened by Christians who are acting Christian, who are being Christian. I think that more Christianity would be the best thing that can happen to America, because it has no. It's not only is it not a threat to me, it would restore the great America that my parents and grandparents came for. But if you're a secular Jew and you don't really have a full understanding or a full commitment to what God wants from you, you grew up on these ridiculous parodies, and it became really part of the mainstream culture in the 80s to make fun of any conservative for his level, just for being an explicitly Christian person.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to be a far left, a bomb thrower. Secularism became the norm, and have people like you who are public people and who are contributors to the culture and who wear their faith not lightly, but in a gracious way, is really what we really. I don't see any other way for us out of the social disaster that this country has become.
I agree, and to that extent, Judaism and Christianity are wholly compatible, and we're an offshoot of Judaism anyway as Christians, and that'd be a fascinating discussion we could have sometime. But part of this too is the Christianity became discredited in the culture because of the lie that science and the Christian religion or the Jewish religion are incompatible, when in fact the opposite is true. All the great scientists were inspired by the Judeo-Christian heritage and worldview. But we're equated with anti-intellectualism when anything that couldn't be further from the truth.
We can blame William Jennings Bryan.
Oh yeah,
for allowing himself to in the Scopes Monkey trial. That was such a perfect. You couldn't have written a better script.
Which is why people like me believe in Satan, because he's the predominant impact that he's had. The greatest conspiracy. Human beings aren't capable of coming up with such brilliant conspiracies to destroy, like the environmental movement and all that stuff. It's bigger than mere human beings. But another thing that I think hurt us as religious people is we come off as scolds and moralistic and fuddy-duddies, and that doesn't wear well in the trendy culture. It's attitudinal. A lot of it's our fault. We can't be scolds. We got to be careful of that.
Well, but I think also that social media makes that worse because interlocutors are always have the advantage, especially atheists or people who claim to be atheists. It's always easy to, we have a Yiddish term that you might like. You could use it in your practice. Schlug up, which means to challenge and, to vigorously challenge something and really rip it apart. Interlocutors always, when you yourself don't take any position, it's basically like being an intellectual terrorist.
No burden of proof. You don't
no
have to
burden
do
of proof.
Yeah.
And in social media, everyone's an interlocutor. Everyone who posts something creative and positive or constructive has to answer to a bunch of wise asses, usually hiding behind anonymous identities. And all right, that's the First Amendment, but it has eroded the quality of discourse.
That's a profound insight. It's so much easier to be a cynic and a drive-by tweeter, for example, than it is to stand up and substantiate your positions. And I admit I'm guilty of it sometimes too, because I'm lazy in a hurry and I want to get that out there. And sometimes
I'm not denying it. I'm a notorious troll, but everyone knows who I am, and if you want to come for me, you can come for me.
I remember the first time I encountered you. You said something, I have no idea anymore. And I said something negative to you, and you go, wait a minute, we're friends. I go, oh my gosh, I took you totally wrong. And ever since then, I've been one of your greatest admirers.
Oh,
but
thank you.
Why did I take you wrong? It's being too quick and too early.
I remember what it was. I tweeted a short clip of Rush on Letterman.
Oh yeah.
Which obviously in Rush in the Rush world is known as it was known as a bad appearance.
An ambush.
Letterman is an ass.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But to me, the reason I was tweeting it was, can you believe we once lived in a world where it was even conceivable for a liberal culture monarch to have Rush on the program, to have someone like Rush, who would be the equivalent of Tucker Carlson today? I mean, just in terms of influence. But you thought not knowing me, you thought I was making fun of Rush for what seemed to you to be an obvious sandbag. And we started, I explained to you, no, are you kidding? Rush, after William F. Buckley, I mean, Rush was so freaking intellectual. And of course, you saw the article I wrote in the Jewish magazine after Rush passed away. But you're right. There is that immediacy on social media that gets the best of so many of us, which is why I love doing this, which I'm in my 4th year of doing podcasts, because you get to sit down with someone that you might have interacted with for years and find out what they're about. And, people sometimes like to listen in.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. By the way, if you ever want an affirmation of what a jerk David Letterman is, Google his interview with Paris Hilton. Now, I never knew anything about Paris Hilton, but she went what a bizarre conversation we're having, but I'm loving it. I hope anybody else might be. But I watched him interviewing her. He ambushed her like he did Rush. She comes in there and she'd been sentenced for something, whatever, drug violence, whatever. And she was on his show to promote a product that she's coming out with. And he wouldn't let her talk. He was mocking her, making fun of her. How's the prison food? Laughing in her face. I fell in love with Paris. She may be the biggest mess in the world, but I will always have empathy or sympathy for her and like her after watching it. She handled it with class and grace, and she's not some bimbo. Maybe people think I'm crazy. I don't know why I even watched it. I don't have any, you know how it is. You end up watching the David Letterman will forever be cemented in my mind as a real mean bully, because she was powerless to do anything about it, and she handled it well. So I tell people that, watch that interview if you ever get a chance.
I think I will. I think I will watch it if I ever get a chance. I can't promise I'll ever get a chance. David, this has been great. I think it just, it's great to have a guest who you can start out, you can have a list of questions and you don't touch them, because you're just having a natural conversation about two people who want to listen to each other and, trying to figure out what's going on in this world. And as you know, I thought that we lawyers would end up talking about lawfare. By the time this airs, which will probably be April or May, it's all going to be resolved. That is my prediction. Is that as patient as everyone is with John Roberts, and I am guilty of drinking the Kool-Aid. I know I did it in the past, but these Democrat judges are setting themselves up with orders that the Supreme Court cannot ignore. You with me on that?
I totally agree. Like even Roberts has to hold his nose. He has to do what's right. Let me ask you this: you are still an IP lawyer?
Yeah.
Okay. So now that everything's national and international, I can refer cases to you because as an entertainment lawyer, people assume that I know about. No, I know enough to know that I don't know anything, and it's very special. By the way, let me just tell you about IP law. It is the most nebulous gray. God, give me a straight answer once, and that's a tough area of law. I won't mess with it. That's one class I should have taken. IP and labor law. Those two things, don't mess with them if you haven't taken a class in them.
So much is left up to a judge's gut feeling. And one of the big things in intellectual property litigation, and let's talk about trademarks.
Yep.
You go and you drop 100, 150, 250,000. It's a little bit cheaper now because of internet. A survey on confusion. You got a 50% chance of it getting thrown out.
Yeah.
And that also means that if a judge likes a case, likes a claim, and he wants to just bring in the marketing director to testify about the value of a trademark with no rigor, no methodology, that person's going to get in. I mean, the judiciary in general is fairly unhinged. But see, in particular, David, what's happening in intellectual property is when you and I started out, most judges had experience in private practice.
Right.
And they'd at least done a little bit of almost everything. Because like you said, in the day, everyone did a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Well, now they're almost all former government employees or community activists and that kind of thing. They don't know what the hell they're doing. They're looking at stuff for the first time. A lot of ex-prosecutors. The clerks are writing their opinions for them, and they say some really stupid stuff.
Yeah. But even the horn books, even the textbooks of IP are tough to follow if you're not in that field, I think.
Well, listen, it is, we think of ourselves as practicing forever and being old dogs who can learn a new trick or two. But I think at a certain point I've realized I know what I know. And, and yet here I am, of a late night writing a brief, and at this point, I do my own research because you know what? No one does it better than I do. If there's a case, Coleman will always find the case. I will always find the case.
I love research. Always have. Do you use Westlaw? What do you use to research?
I use Westlaw.
Yeah.
And I've used Westlaw for a million years. Yeah. Lexis, when I opened up my law firm, pressed me really, really hard. And they gave me for just a few bucks a month. They said, also, take us also. And they could come to all these AI tools. And guess what? If I'm solo, I don't have associates they've got an AI tool that will write deposition questions for you.
Wow. I didn't know that.
I can't say no to that. So again, it was really cost effective, but Westlaw head notes are the keys to the kingdom. You and I learned how to use decennial digests. Today's kids don't understand.
We had all the regional reporters. My grandfather was a scholar. He wrote the books on probate law that every law firm in Missouri used in the 40s before the major probate law changed. So we had all the regional reporters, Southwest, Northwest, Northeast, and we couldn't afford them, didn't need them, but we had them because he was a purist on research. So it was that's the training I had. That's the heritage I had with law. Loved the law. My dad was a constitutional conservative.
I don't think any of my sons is going to be a lawyer.
Mine aren't. So I'm cutting them off. Sick of them.
David, this was great. We got to do it again or something much like it sometime. I'm glad we got to know each other better. And I thank everyone for culminating with us today.
Thank you so much, Ron. It's an honor.